G'day trendsetters, welcome to episode 5 of the Wabi podcast. Today I'd like to talk about resignation, hope and the absurd. It's a talk inspired by one of the collections from Paris Fashion Week, namely Rick Owens' Spring-Summer 2024 women's collection titled Lido. The presentation of the runway was captivating, and it made me think about a lot of the themes that come up in the practice of the Japanese tea ceremony, believe it or not, and especially the style of chano-yu, or tea ceremony practiced by Furuta Oribe. So I'd like to go through some of these things and structure the talk around the titles Broken, Fixed, and Sisyphus, i.e. the Greek myth. I'll probably relate a lot of Furuta Oribe's acts in the Chashitsu and his artworks that he created during his lifetime with Rick Owens' art, his fashion, and the way that he sculpts his clothes and presents them, and the links philosophically to some of the thought embodied in the practice of tea ceremony, chano-yu, and Rick Owens' style of fashion and approach to the world through his clothes. No doubt I'll bring up some of John Dewey's philosophy in there to strengthen the whole thing, and Albert Camus to give us some hope for the absurd future. So polish the floor, grab a tea, and tune in. What blew me away about Rick Owens' collection, the Lido collection, Spring-Summer 2024 for women, was that it powerfully conveyed a will to harmonise polarities, both within the individual self and groups and society, in order to move forward from the predicament that we currently find ourselves in. And I guess we can sum up that predicament with things like endless war, increasing censorship, erosion of human rights, increasing police presence in society, and money is bloating politics and science to the point where it's hard to discern truth anymore and engage in democracy. So it's a time where it's really hard to have hope. I admit that myself. It's very easy to fall into despair at the moment. But cynicism is not a viable option either. Cynicism is like choosing the road towards death rather than hop on the road that wills life, despite the situation that we find ourselves in, even if it seems hopeless. Surely there's something that we can forge to better our situation individually and for the people that we love. And then hopefully that spreads on and on and on and on outside of our ken. Rick's collection expressed a deeply concerned, tough, resilient, battle scars and all vision of our current world of tension. And he recontextualised this tension as a vision of beauty. Now, Mr. Owens is a bloody legend because he's a team player. He puts the show notes of his collection in the YouTube description. So we can be pretty sure about the things that he's wrestling with, from concept to creation of his clothes each season. So I'd like to quote him here so I don't do him any injustice. He says, "I went to a Björk concert earlier this month, and her intelligent, life-affirming energy made me kind of embarrassed of my own mopey, adolescent pessimism. And hers wasn't a Disney escapist obliviousness, but a concerned and thoughtful trust in moving forward. She expressed hope. I suppose I express resignation. My default setting is to propose a more sombre sobriety, respectful of an ailing and struggling world, observing a war. My enthusiasm is more tempered and suspicious, but I try to express the hope for joy while cautioning empathy and responsibility. Diana Ross allowed me to do a remix of her most recently released song, which I imagined as a hymn, with the repeated refrain, I still believe in love, as a simple but determined expression of faith and hope." So of course you're compelled to watch the video of this collection, so I'll leave the link in the description. So for me, this text and also the collection really embodied the struggle towards unification, Or in the Japanese tea ceremony, the value of harmony. It's one of the core values of tea. So just like Rick's collection was born in a time of crisis, namely our world today, the Japanese tea ceremony as an art in itself was actually born in the Warring States period of Japan, a time of crisis, 200 years of constant civil war. And in the midst of that relentless tension, this art was born as a defiant, concerned, battle scars and all embrace of that world of tension, and trying to recontextualize it and offer it as a vision of beauty. So the everyday act of making tea became a high art in getting people together to reflect on the inherent suffering of life and recognizing that it holds profound moments of beauty. One way that the samurai recontextualized their world of suffering into a vision of beauty was to take unassuming flowers that you would pass by on the battlefield and see this little wildflower there growing in the field that you're trudging by off into battle, picking those up and just putting a single flower or one or two blooms in a dark recess called an alcove or tokonoma. And when you come into the tea room, the first thing that you do is go before this dark recess and contemplate that flower. Now, this is something that's been severed from its source of life and put there as kind of a sacrifice for that day's gathering. And just like the flower sitting there silently in the vase in this dark recess, you never know how long it will take before it starts to wilt and dwindle and finally fade away. And just like that, the situation of the samurai was one that they did not know if they were going to die when they left the tea room on the way home, whether they would be called to battle the next day and that would be their last battle, or whether they would survive another 20 years or more. Death was very close to the individual at that time. So seeing transient life before one there in the recess of a tea room, in the flower, was a way to reflect on one's own life. My own grandmaster, when doing flowers in the morning before practice, we'd arrange a flower, put it in the alcove, and then in the morning light, sit back and contemplate the flower. He'd often say, "Ikiteru na, ikiteru na," which basically means either there's no subject there, but I feel so alive, or life with an exclamation mark. So even though that life is surely transient, which is emphasized in severing the flower from its life force, it still has life force. So even though our situation is seemingly without hope, like we're severed from any sense of coherency in life, we still have our own individual life that can never be taken away from us and is as beautiful as it is transient. And in Rick's collection, this was reproduced, believe it or not, on a grand scale. He often releases his work in the courtyard of the Palais de Tokyo in Paris, and this has beautiful sandstone murals on the walls with stairwells coming down into this huge court with a square pond, a shallow pond in the middle. And all the models come down and walk around this court. And at this particular time, the visuals that he chose to pair with the release of his clothes were smoke machines and a projection of rose petals on the far end of the court. So, whereas when you come into the tea room and contemplate the flower in the alcove, and a single unassuming flower, but with big life, Rick had rose petals shooting up into the breeze and then floating down over the courtyard and into the water and floating on the pond as sort of a grand way of expressing the transient life force that we have in chabana, or flowers for tea. And the aesthetic of the clothes was quite tough, but the colours of the rose petals and the smoke were reds and pinks and yellows, and especially the smoke that was creating this foggy shadow in the court were rotating between pink and yellow. And in pink you have a suggestion of love and romance and hope, and in yellow you have joy and friendship. So even though this tough, impenetrable Sisters of Mercy gridiron team was coming out and parading around the square. It was tempered by visuals closer to a Björk concert, if you will, that offered us some sort of unification or reconciliation with themes of faith and hope and empathy. One metaphor you might find for this in the Japanese tea ceremony is with gold repair, kintsugi. So the cracks of a broken piece are mended with lacquer and then dusted with gold to accentuate the brokenness. And for a samurai warrior coming back from the battlefield, of course you're going to be left with scars. And rather than dwell on those scars and the ugliness of existence, when you look at that gold repair in the tea bowl, you might come to realise that actually your scars have some sort of beauty. And many people interpret the samurai doing tea as a means of getting pumped up before battle. So the caffeine in the tea would make them feel stronger in some sense before they go out and face the enemy. But actually it was the other way around, it was the opposite. Tea was necessary for the samurai who survived battle. So they're coming back with their scars and longing for a place, a tranquil place to recenter themselves and connect with some sort of life that transcends their own life. And they can see this when they encounter the flower. They can see this in the gold repair, when scars have been not just repaired, but shown to be beautiful. So just like being proud of one's scars and being proud of this object of art that has gold repair, when we clothe ourselves and go out into the world, that can also be an expression of defiance. And MIA said in her song Survivor, "Survivor, who said it was easy? Survivor, they can never stop we." So there's something in that offers recognition that, of course, it's bloody hard, but we have to find something within ourselves to keep us going. And that might seem thin philosophically, but I'm going to get to that a little bit later on. On the battlefield, it wasn't just complete enemy and people you didn't know. Like, these are people that were that had allegiances to feudal lords, and there was a lot of contact in times of relative peace between these different clans. And so we'd often have a lot of friends in other clans. But if your feudal lord fell out with another feudal lord, that would mean that you would be possibly put into battle against people that you know, have great friendships with, and even love. And coming back from battle with a sense of no justice in the world and being totally forlorn and feeling empty can easily translate into cynicism and pessimism and turn self-destructive. But the way they tempered that was to hop in the tea room into a tranquil space that honoured imperfect works of art, these deformed tea bowls and cracked water jars that were repaired with gold repair, etc., as a way to experience the suchness of things and the fact that inherent in the life force and the beauty of things is something transcendent that we also have inside ourselves, and no one can ever take that away from you unless you choose to give it up. So in this tension of feelings of hopelessness and a world of beauty, i.e. your situation and the tea room, a unification process happened which allowed the samurai to move forward in the world towards a vision of peace. And for our situation nowadays, of course there's not as much overt killing as there was in the Warring States period of Japan. I guess you could walk down the street and see a dead body back in those days. But there's still an extreme amount of violence, but it's just psychological in our time, especially with how things are organised online. We encounter a huge amount of emotional violence every day. So just like the samurai, we still need these moments to hop in the tea room and reconfirm the things that we appreciate and find beautiful, and find hope and renew our faith in moving forward. So the relevance of the tea room and the Japanese tea ceremony by no means has faded over the 450 years of existence. To the contrary, the reason that it exists and endures is because it gives us these things for our soul. And here I'd like to bring in John Dewey's philosophy, because he was all about art as experience, and the way towards art was to integrate your discombobulated experience towards some sort of fleeting moment of harmony. And this helps elucidate the value of harmony in the Japanese tea ceremony, because paradoxically, we need tension in order to achieve harmony. And it's precisely because we're involved in this constant spiral of things breaking and then having to mend that we can achieve the beauty of harmony. Because the two theoretical worlds in which there was no beauty for John Dewey was a world of flux and nirvana. So a world of flux is just continuous uncertainty. You have no sense of continuity between one experience to the next. Everything is just completely discombobulated. You don't know who's talking the truth. You don't know what to rely on. You don't know who to trust. It's just absolute chaos. So this is quite an ugly vision of the world. You need to unify your experience somehow and integrate some sort of reasoning behind your experiences to thread them together in order that you can forge your way ahead and build on something. And for a world of nirvana, of course, we look at nirvana as a vision of beauty, but that's because we don't have it right here. But if we were living in that world of nirvana, or like heaven, where everything is seemingly perfect, like Plato's world of the realm of the forms, where everything is existing in this perfect version of itself, there's no beauty here, because we don't have anything ugly to compare it to. This philosophy can actually relay something quite profound onto the idea of a bodhisattva, because the bodhisattva ideal in Buddhism is somebody who chooses to be reborn over and over and over and over again in the world in order to create moments of harmony for other individuals, in order to offer hope to other people. So it refuses that world of nirvana in order to be reborn back into the turbulence and the tension of our everyday world in order to help others unify their own experience. And for John Dewey, this is actually quite similar to the role of an artist. And here I'll quote John Dewey. "The rhythm of loss of integration with environment and recovery of union not only persists in man, but becomes conscious with him. Its conditions are material out of which he forms purposes, i.e. tea and fashion. Emotion is the conscious sign of a break, actual or impending. The discord is the occasion that induces reflection." So in this we can see that the tension of loss of meaning and the need to unify one's experience is a human condition, and the need to assimilate our fractured existence creates purposes and ways like the way of tea or the way of fashion that we can find reason for being. And John Dewey continues, he says, "Desire for restoration of the union, i.e. in one's psyche, converts mere emotion into interest in objects as conditions of realization of harmony." To give some examples to this, I would say like Wabi aesthetics. So before the Japanese tea ceremony embraced these ideals of imperfection as things that express the truth of existence and therefore find them beautiful, tea was really concerned with more perfect art pieces imported from the Chinese continent. But the way of tea said, no, this is actually not where it's at. This is kind of close to John Dewey's idea of nirvana, where things are so beautiful that beauty ceases to exist. The real truth in existence and the real way to forge a moral way ahead is contemplating an aesthetic that is not all shiny, happy people holding hands. There's imperfections here that kick us in the guts and make us wake up to realise that right before our eyes in everyday life, there is something quite charming. And if we can unify this imperfection and this forever imperfect existence with a philosophy of life, there we can really forge a vision of beauty. And here's the role of the artist for John Dewey. When shit is broken, the role of the artist is to forge a way ahead. And this comes up extremely well in Rick Owens' text. You can see he knows that shit is broken and he's trying to forge a way ahead. And the aesthetic is tough because the artist does not shun moments of tension. Rather, the artist cultivates moments of tension in order to bring into living consciousness an experience that is unified and total. And these moments of passage from disturbance to harmony are the moments of intensest life, the most intense life. And I really felt that when watching Rick's collection, and I really feel that in the tea room. And it's not just me, this has traditionally been one of the unifying aesthetics for the samurai way of doing tea. In warrior class tea, we always talk about kinchoukan as being beautiful, as being the ideal for a tea room. And when you enter the tea room, there's this kinchoukan, which is a sense or feeling of tension. Kinchou means like to be on edge or nervous or tense, and kang is feeling. So this kinchoukan in the air, like the air is pulled tight like a string, is what we're trying to achieve when we create the ambience for a tea room. A great vision of this is how we hang a kettle suspended from a chain from the roof, and this heavy iron kettle over the fire, just an inch or so above the fire, is perfectly suspended from a hanging chain from the roof, which really exemplifies that kinchoukan, that tension in the air. And it wasn't just the samurai warriors who practiced the tea ceremony that realised the potential for this type of beauty. Oscar Wilde has a fantastic quote that says, "The suspense is terrible. I hope it will last."
The suspense is terrible. I hope it will last.
So without getting too philosophical, I try to bring it down more into the lived world with some examples. One of the ways that tension is maintained throughout a tea gathering, besides the hanging kettle suspended by a chain, which is quite a literal vision of tension, we take Oribe's most famous freshwater jar, a mizusashi. It's called the yabure bukuro. So this was a igaware pot used for holding water or grain or something, an everyday item. But it exploded in the kiln, not to smithereens, so it cannot be salvaged, but it had cracked sort of beyond repair, so to speak. The potters would have had no choice but to throw it away normally, but Oribe had obviously salvaged this piece and dedicated a huge amount of time to repair this meticulously with lacquer so that it would hold water again. And so throughout the tea gathering, sitting there as a guest, looking at this broken piece, but fixed, there's always the sense that, maybe it's going to leak, maybe it's going to break again, maybe the whole thing is going to fall apart. We're kept on edge by this duality in thought of something being both fixed but potentially quite able to fall into a broken state again. And when you look at Rick Owens' runway, the elongation of the legs with these huge leather boots coming down with a volume at the bottom and quite elevated high heels and platforms that the models have to balance skillfully when they're walking, and it actually makes them walk in a more determined, conscious manner. When we're looking at the whole of the person balanced on these glorious visions of resistance, we still hold the thought that, maybe they're going to slip and fall. The idea of balance that they're having to consciously hold in their mind is a real part of our experience too. So there's a tension that's created from the visual. The tension I'm talking about here with somebody walking in those long leather boots with high platforms and the clear heels and the classic Rick Owens shoes is not unlike classical dance and the tension that's created by watching someone perform on the stage. So it takes a lot of training and cultivation to sculpt the body and sculpt the forms to present a visual that's aesthetically pleasing. And you can sort of crudely capture this idea with the phrase, beauty is pain. It's a bit crude, but you think about all the training and the hardship that one has to go through to realise this vision of beauty and to maintain it. There's always a danger that something's going to break down. The viewer is asked to have an empathetic response almost to the vision of beauty that's presented before them. There's somebody walking down the street with a high aesthetic that could break down. We admire the guts and the vision and the personal cultivation to present such an aesthetic out in the world. And we're called to have respect for this achievement, just like when we're watching a classical ballet performance.
Just like a mizusashi presents broken and fixed, suspended in time, our experience of this scene, whether it be the art object, the mizusashi, or the model wearing Rick Owens' clothes and the boots and the platforms, the lack of subtlety evokes an intense emotional response, which is linked with beauty. And some examples from conceptual art that was very much alive in the early days of the Japanese tea ceremony. When Sen Rikyu, probably the most famous tea master ever, who was Oribe's teacher, when Rikyu died, Oribe was deeply affectionate and had a very strong relationship with Rikyu, his teacher. And the chashaku, the tea scoop that Rikyu carved and used for his last bowl of tea before he had to commit ritual suicide, or seppuku, he gave to Oribe. And Oribe created a case for this chashaku that was conceptually the same form as an ihai, or a death plaque. So when somebody dies, they write their death name down the centre of this black, like a plaque. The cases for chashaku were usually just bamboo, and you wrote the poetic name of the chashaku on the front of the case, and the chashaku was held inside. The chashaku had already gained a very important place in the artistic vision of the Japanese tea ceremony, in that it was said to express the true spirit of the maker. So you can almost see a vision into the soul of the craftsman when looking at a chashaku. And with this idea and accepted culture, Oribe created a black lacquer case which resembled the ihai death plaque, and opened a window in the case so that you could see a glimpse of the chashaku inside. So there was no decision of a poetic name, like how can you name Rikyu's last chashaku before his death? Rather, he gave us a window into the mind state of Rikyu before his death, for us for eternity. And another thing that he did with one of Rikyu's letters, it was at first a humorous letter, jesting that Rikyu was crying at the loss of one of his tea jars. He had to give up one of his tea jars to another person, and he was lamenting that he would never be able to get it back, and lamenting with tears. And strangely, in this letter, there was quite a large gap, larger than normal, between the body of writing and his signature at the end. So this vast space of yohaku, which is one of the technical terms in calligraphy. Yohaku is the negative space, or just the blank paper, that's not touched by ink, but is incorporated in the artwork. So the use of empty space in the overall artwork. So there's this vast piece of yohaku between the body of writing and the sign-off of Rikyu. And Oribe took this space and made it the feature of a hanging scroll. In the tea gatherings after Rikyu's death, Oribe would hang this scroll with this section of the letter cut out from the body where he mentioned tears and Rikyu's own name, and the vast open space in the middle, to add not just a sense of tension, but a sense of contemplation and the opportunity for the participants of the tea gathering to forge some sort of reconciliation in their own minds about the deep injustice of Rikyu's death. And when you have a look at some of the pieces presented in Rick Owens' Summer 2024 Women's Collection, there's pieces that are large solid forms of cloth draping down the body, with huge capes blowing out the back, seemingly into the ether, that bring in that yohaku, or that negative space of the environment, the empty space around the model, bringing in the suggestion of that negative space into the garment. And with the ihai, the case for the chashaku, that resembles a death plaque, the models were also wearing a veil, a transparent veil, hanging down over their face. So you could hardly see one area of skin in the overall look. But there was sort of a window into the eyes and the soul, so to speak, of the wearer through this veil. So despite the injustice and the pressure to give up hope in our surrounds, there's still a glimpse to something eternal that's inside that can never be taken away. So by doing tea, we're always coming from a loss of connection with our reality into a tea house where we can re-establish
an equilibrium with our surrounds. And when we clothe ourselves every day, don't just chuck on any old t-shirt and shorts. We have the opportunity each time that we put clothes on our body to recontextualize our experiences up until now with a vision of beauty that empowers us to go on and also allows us to inspire others to do the same. Coming up in other people's minds at the moment might be other ways to recontextualize our experience, namely with things like religion or the idea of God that transcends and offers some sort of meaning that we can orientate ourselves towards and try and transcend our situation. Now, this has also been done by some of the existentialist philosophers, namely Soren Kierkegaard. He maintained that in a world where we need to create meaning for ourselves, and meaning is not predetermined, the greatest move that we can do is one of faith, where we commit ourselves to the idea of God. And he brings this up through the story of Abraham and Isaac, where God tells Abraham to kill his own son, Isaac. And Abraham struggled with this idea, as you do, and couldn't work out whether he was going to go through with the act or not, but in the end he decided that yes, he was going to go through with this order from God and kill his own son. And just before he was about to bring the knife down on Isaac, God stopped him and rewarded him for his faith. And a bit later on, some other existentialists, namely Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, said, hang on a sec, mate. Abraham had no idea if the voice that he heard was God's voice or the devil's voice. If someone appears before you, or if you hear a voice telling you to kill your own son, how can you ever know whether that voice is from God or the devil? Is this leap of faith genuine, or is it something of some self-deceptive insanity? And Camus developed this thought into extremely mature philosophy centering around the myth of Sisyphus. So this is a Greek myth where Sisyphus was condemned by the gods to push a rock or roll a rock up a hill every day, only for the rock to fall back down to the bottom of the hill at the end of the day, and him having to trudge down at night. Then the next morning, take up the rock and roll it back up the hill, only at the end of the day for the rock to roll back down, and on and on and on and on, every day for the rest of his days. And Camus saw that in this life of Sisyphus, pushing a rock up the hill only for it to roll back down every day, was a metaphor for our own existence, i.e. waking up every day, going to work, having a bite to eat, do some more work in the afternoon, come home, sleep, wake up, go to work, come home, sleep. In French they say métro, boulot, dodo. So you hop on the metro, you go to work, boulot, and then dodo, sleep at night. So this repetition of the same every day creates a sort of monotony in existence that can be seen as absurd. The magnification of this thought is embodied in the myth of Sisyphus, having to roll the rock up the hill seemingly for no meaning each day, only for it to roll back down and do it again, a completely meaningless, absurd existence. But, Camus says, if Sisyphus takes that rock to be his own rock, and the dirt upon which he trudges, his own dirt, and the beads of sweat that gather on his forehead every day, rolling this rock up in the sun, as the jewels of his resistance and will to life, and the muscles that are sculpted from the act of repeating this rolling the rock up the hill every day, as the marble statue of his glory, he turns his punishment into a work of art, and he rather ends up laughing back at the gods. So he becomes stronger than the punishment intended to crush him. So Camus says that when you realise that your existence is absurd, like Sisyphus, you can be thrown into despair, but at that very point you are compelled to a life of greater intensity. And if you can embrace and own your flawed existence, you can transcend that bleak picture and recontextualize it as a vision of beauty. So with this move of Sisyphus, he becomes an artist in the way that John Dewey describes, in that an artist cares about how one achieves harmony through tension. So when you come to this state of despair, an artist who falls into that state of despair and gives up any sense of trying to unify his experience with some vision of hope ceases to be an artist. They become a cynical, pessimistic person that has little to contribute. But if you choose to have faith and hope despite your situation, the mode of existence changes into one of an artist. And Wabi, who is given the credit for establishing Noh theatre in Japan, had a philosophy of beginner's mind. And if we take Sisyphus at the point of his realisation that he can turn his life into art, we can see his life from there developing as Wabi explained the beginner's mind relative to the arts. So there was 3 phases of the beginner's mind. The beginner's mind of youth was one where the artist is learning his craft and learning the skills and forms that express beauty. So for a Noh actor, they're just learning the routines and the plays and how to execute them with great skill. And there's a passion and drive in this youthful artist that is beautiful. And so Sisyphus, having this new realisation, turning his life into art, might find the most beautiful way to roll that rock up the hill. Don't show any sign of pain and torment, but take delight in his fate of having to push this rock up the hill like a Noh theatre play each day. And then after a while of discovering and embodying these forms, you get to the second stage of beginner's mind, which is the beginner's mind of maturity. So this is somebody that's fully embodied their understanding of the forms of that particular art and is starting to find their own self-expression. So for a Noh theatre actor, I know this routine back to front. Now how am I going to execute it with an individuality that contributes something to my tradition? So after Sisyphus has perfected the form of rolling the rock up the hill and down in a beautiful manner each day, how can he individualise this act so that when people see Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill, it can only be Sisyphus rolling that rock up the hill. Hercules looks like a lout in comparison. And then the third stage of beginner's mind, according to Wabi, is the beginner's mind of seniority or old age. So this is when the seasoned artist, the seasoned actor, gets up on the stage and their movement may be a little bit more restricted than what it was in the past, but because they have embodied those forms and found their own personal expression, just by moving a metre across the stage, it's as if a plum blossom is bursting on an ancient wood. Just by moving the head to look at Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill in the distance, it's as if the artist is capturing the consciousness of everybody in the theatre and everybody is looking through his eyes. And so at the end of his life, Sisyphus might only make it halfway or not even halfway up the mountain, a few hundred metres up the mountain each day. But just in this act alone, even the gods are looking upon Sisyphus with tears in their eyes. And through developing this philosophy, Camus had a renewed respect for everyday life. He wrote very much about the ordinary experience of human beings and the beauty that one can find threaded through the quotidien, rather than search for something higher outside oneself. Beauty was right here. We just have to will it, and by maintaining that will, we can never be corrupted. And this is quite a profound conclusion to his philosophy, because it arrives at the same point that the early tea masters arrived at in the creation of the Japanese tea ceremony. So that severance from traditional beauty in perfection and gorgeous forms, and instead searching for beauty in Wabi, things that were imperfect and broken and warped and strange, in order to forge beauty that will never grow tired. The search is as real as our everyday life. The interplay of formal perfection, the manner in which we do the tea ceremony, and formal imperfection, the objects that we choose to employ within that perfect form of the tea ceremony, creates a timeless tension in which we find fleeting moments of harmony. And for Rick Owens fans, and fashion fans in general, if we come to the conclusion that in the absurdity of life, there is still ways to make our existence beautiful, that everyday act of clothing the body, of covering oneself, turns into an expression of one's own convictions and is an extension of one's own artwork, one's life. And curiously, or perhaps very wisely, the word for absurd in Japanese is mucha, which means mu, no, cha, tea, no tea. Absurd is a state of no tea. No tea in life would be absurd. And lo and behold, tea is also the decision, like Sisyphus, to make every day into art. And this is what's been behind me, all these podcasts for people looking at this on YouTube. There's 3 pieces of calligraphy behind me here in the form of tanzaku. This long elongated strip of cardboard paper are called tanzaku. And the calligraphy I've chosen to write is mucha, 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 mucha. Absurd, absurd, absurd. And if you'd like one, they'll be available on my Patreon with a healthy discount for patrons. But anybody can buy them nonetheless if you'd like one, so hop over there and have a look. I'll put the link in the description. So on that absurd note, I'd like to leave it here, and thank you very much for your attention and listening throughout. If you'd like to support this podcast, either free or paid, please sign up to the mailing list through my Patreon. If you'd like some tea, you can also buy that through my website. If you'd like to learn tea, send me a message via my website. My translated book, written by my Grandmaster, Pearl Among the Clouds, is also for sale via the website. Please feel free to share and subscribe the media that I'm putting out there via my various channels. And please, in ending, make sure you go and check out Rick Owens' latest collection if you haven't already. And Funk Wabi.